All right, everybody, let's go. We are continuing with the critique of the TikTok series that Christian Gonzalez has produced on metaethics. And I didn't post this video on Discord, so let me go do that real quick. Post it there and there, and then we'll be good to go. All right, what's up, Travis? So Travis has some great videos. They're much shorter than mine. That cover many of the same topics, critiquing bad arguments against moral anti-realism. So go check out Travis's channel. This is Travis right here. Travis Talks 2. Check out Travis's channel. And Travis, you were the first one, so you get 1,000 land salute. We've got Kitab Podcast in for 500, and we just need one more, and we'll have our first 3 people. But let's get right into the video.
That 4 of these 5 theories about morality are wrong, you are forced to agree that objective morality is correct. In this,
so let me take it back to the beginning of that, because Christian is starting with this critique approach that Mike Huemer uses, which Mike Huemer says there are 5 types of metaethical positions. These are the only logically possible positions that you could take. He says this in his book, Ethical Intuitionism, and he's also said this in interviews and podcasts. He just appeared in a video, Mike Huemer himself, debating moral realism a day or 2 ago, so I'm going to get around to reviewing that. But the 5 positions are, there's 3 anti-realist ones and 2 realist ones. So the anti-realist positions are non-cognitivism, which holds that there are no moral truths because moral claims just aren't even in the business of stating propositions. Stance-dependent cognitivism, he calls it subjectivism. This is the view that there are moral truths, but they depend on people's stances. And then the third is error theory, which is that moral claims attempt to refer to objective or stance-independent moral facts, but there are no such facts, so all such claims systematically fail. The 2 realist positions say there are these stance-independent moral facts. One says they're natural, one says they're not natural. Those are the 5. And now Huemer wants to use a process of elimination approach where he says these are the 5 possible positions. If he could rule out 4 of them, which are the 3 anti-realist positions and the naturalist position, you're left with non-naturalist moral realism. And that's the position Huemer believes that you're left with once you've successfully critiqued the other 4. Now, a lot of anti-realists defend one of those 3 positions. I don't do that. Instead, I say that Huemer and Christian, by extension, are incorrect to say that these are the only 5 logically possible positions. I endorse an alternative philosophical position. It's not one of the 5, and there's nothing logically impossible about it. So the claim that these are the only 5 possible positions is simply false. It's just false. Now, why did this claim originate? Why does Huemer maintain that this is the case? Well, Huemer is operating under the assumption that there is some sort of category, a moral claim, and that those claims must be have a uniform determinate semantic content. All such claims are propositions, or they're not propositions. All such claims purport to refer to stance-independent facts, or to refer to stance-dependent facts, or to not refer to any facts at all. And so Huemer and others appear to treat moral claims, first-order moral claims, as having some sort of distinctive a priori content. Now, that's one possibility, if that's the assumption that they make. Now, the only options are that's the assumption they make, that's not the assumption they make. If that's the assumption they make, I reject that because I don't think that there are a priori facts of the matter, like synthetic a priori substantive facts of the matter of that kind. So I don't have to accept that assumption, and I could still think that there are no stance-independent moral facts. I'm not required to share Huemer's conception of how semantics works in order to have a position. It's not logically impossible to have an alternative conception of semantics. And if Huemer or Christian think that it is, they're welcome to state why it's logically impossible. Alternatively, one could take, and I doubt Huemer has this approach, they could regard facts about the meaning of moral claims to be empirical questions about what ordinary people are like doing, something about their psychology, something about the like psycholinguistics of everyday practice. If that's the case, that's an empirical question. Now, I did my dissertation research on that empirical question, and what I tried to show in that is that there is another alternative possibility. This is one that was put forward by an analytic philosopher, so I didn't invent this idea. Michael Gill, who argues for what he calls folk metaethical indeterminacy, which is the view that people have no determinate commitment one way or another. So there is an option other than one of the 5. One option is none of the above, and that is a logical possibility. People aren't required to take a stance on these things. Nor does it have to be the case that there's a determinate fact of the matter about what they're implicitly committed to when they make moral claims. There are other possibilities as well. I talk about them on my blog. There is pluralism, incoherentism. Those are the other 2 main ones. So really, there are a variety of alternative perspectives that one could take. Some of them could potentially operate within the semantic assumptions that Humer and maybe Christian take on board, but mine don't. I reject those assumptions. So there's a serious problem here. Anyway, I wanted to give a little framework before we get into this, because he's continuing to operate with this process of elimination approach, and that's going to run through the next few videos. And Eric, you came in for 250 land salute. And Travis, I'd like to see you do a video response to it, because yours are so concise. So I really like to see them. Okay, let's get back to it.
We're arguing against moral relativism or ethical subjectivism. Ethical subjectivism is a theory that says what makes an action right or wrong depends on someone's attitude. There's at least 3 versions of subjectivism, and the third one's going to surprise you. So the first version is called individual subjectivism. This says that X is right just means I approve of X. The second version of subjectivism is one you're probably more familiar with. This is cultural subjectivism, which says that if something is right, it just means that my society generally approves of that thing. And the third one, which is going to surprise a lot of people, is divine command theory. Because the thing that makes something right is still a someone. That someone just happens to be God. Now, before I get into the objections, I want to make one thing perfectly clear. Unlike the video in part 1, where the arguments are basically knockdown arguments, the arguments I'm going to give you are not knockdown arguments. You can still walk out.
Christian hasn't given a single knockdown argument in this entire series. Sorry, Christian, you just really haven't. There are responses, and you have not done a good job of responding to those responses. You can be upset with me if you like, Christian, but I have not seen you adequately engage with critiques from myself or from Travis or from people that have responses to why the arguments that you've presented are not very persuasive or not very effective. I hate to say it, but Humer's arguments against anti-realist positions are rather underdeveloped and not very strong. They just are. And I've seen better critiques from other moral realists than Humer's critiques. It might be that Humer is good at presenting positive arguments for moral realism. Humer has presented, the argument for moral convergence. He's presented his ontological argument. I think Humer has done a good job of shouldering the burden of making a positive case for non-naturalist realism. He's used his epistemological framework, phenomenal conservatism, to support his case. Fine. Now, I disagree with all of that, but Humer's done the work. But when it comes to his critiques of the anti-realist positions, if you look at his interviews and you look at the way that he treats them in Ethical Intuitionism and elsewhere, these positions are absurd, and it's just a brute appeal to him finding some sentence that is an implication of the position to be ludicrous on its face, and to dismiss it pretty much for that reason alone, without unpacking and considering, in a way I find satisfactory, what the actual implications of that position are. So, for instance, take error theory. So error theory would say that stuff like torturing babies for fun is not wrong. An error theorist is committed to saying that. Does that make error theory absurd? No. Why would it make error theory absurd? Well, you could scoff and, and sputter. It's wrong. Okay. All the error theorist is committed to when they say that is, technically, when we say it's wrong, what that means is it stands independently wrong. There are no stance independent facts, moral facts of the relevant kind. And so that statement is, technically speaking, false. Now, that has zero implications for the attitudes or behavior of the error theorist. The error theorist can act exactly like the realist. So an error theorist could say, look, technically speaking, baby torture is not wrong in the stance independent sense. Nevertheless, if we're going to say, look, that's just what moral language is for, I have a schmoral position on the matter, which is that it's repugnant and horrible and deeply ishmoral. And ishmoral stuff is just stuff that is inconsistent with this constructivist process I'm committed to, or with my personal attitudes or whatever. And then what follows from that are exactly the same emotions, normative attitudes, advocacy for the same social policies and laws. Absolutely no practical difference whatsoever. Moral realism gets you nothing of practical value. Absolutely nothing of practical value. Now, it looks like when an error theorist, because think about how this is presented to students. You could say to students, yeah, well, error theorists don't even think the Holocaust was wrong. They think there was nothing wrong with genociding Jews. There's nothing wrong with gassing millions of people to death. Now, that makes it sound like the error theorist has a horrifying, awful, normative moral position, and they don't. So it's misleading. Now, I don't think Humer intends to mislead people, but that is the implication that it has when you present this to lay people. They're not able to distinguish conceptually and emotionally the normative and the metaethical in order to properly understand what that means. You could like a Jewish philosopher, anti-realist that is on a crusade to that's kind of ironic, they're on a crusade to like stop Nazis, like could literally be in the process. It could be like Inglorious Bastards, where they're taking out Nazis left and right, and they could say, hey, I'm an anti-realist and an error theorist, so technically speaking, I don't think that this is wrong. That while they're stopping it, clearly they're against it, right? Meanwhile, immoral realists could be perpetuating the Holocaust. So your normative attitudes and your beliefs and values are totally orthogonal to your metaethical position. And so for whatever reason, realists, I think, continuously leverage the superficial and misleading and false appearance that error theory, subjectivism, and non-cognitivism are committed to dastardly and horrifying normative moral implications. Now, I don't know if that's Humer's reaction. Humer might think, well, no, I don't find that's not what I'm responding to. I'm responding to the obvious fact that these things are stance independently wrong. That's fine if he just keeps finding it obvious whenever he considers these positions. But that kind of argument is at best an intersubjective appeal. So I look at these scenarios. Oh, okay, an implication of error theory is that nothing is stance independently wrong. I have no intuition that that's absurd. Subjectivism says that if some society thinks something is good, then it's good for that society to do it. Well, what does it mean that it's good for that society to do it? It just means that the society approves of it. Now, if you're talking about some weird form of subjectivism that adds in the irreducible normativity and makes it like really good in some funky way, then my problem with that subjectivism is it's too much like realism. It's got irreducible normativity. It's got objectionable features realism has. But if it's a reductive, descriptive subjectivist account where what it means to say, according to this culture, torturing babies is good, if all that means, and you say, okay, so they're committed to the view that it is good. If all it means to say that it is good is that the society approves of it, that actually turns out to be trivially true. And so what's objectionable about that? Well, you might find it objectionable if you think that's not what people mean when they make moral claims, or that's not what I mean when I make moral claims, or that's not what my intuitions about morality are. And that's fine. You're welcome to those intuitions. You're welcome to have that view that that's not what people mean. Now, if you don't think that's what people means, that's an empirical question. We could go and find out. If you think it's some a priori matter, well, then what's absurd about someone rejecting the methodology of this a prioristic approach to addressing these matters? I think what people mean is an empirical question. I don't think it's an a priori question. Is that absurd? Why is that absurd? Is that obviously absurd to lay people without training in philosophy? How would Humer know whether it is or not? That's an empirical question about, and how would, are they going to have a position on this? They don't study these topics. That's a technical matter. So I don't think that this process of elimination approach works very well at all. I think Humer is just brutally appealing to his own intuitions and expecting others to share them. I don't. And I don't know. I don't think Humer has any methodology available to him to show that his intuitions are somehow more truth tracking than mine. And so at best, we're at an epistemic impasse. In other words, if at the end of the day, all Humer has is he's got intuitions that all things considered, when you weigh all the considerations against one another, favor moral realism. Okay, well, I don't. So now what? Does he have a further argument? I don't think that he does. And I don't see any good reason to think that his intuitions are better than mine. And so if he wants to say he's justified in being a realist, okay, then I'm justified in being an anti-realist by those standards. I don't accept those standards of justification. But then what? Okay, good. So you're to me, this is like saying, hey, if your prior is sufficiently high, then you're not going to believe otherwise. And you're allowed to do that. Sure you are. I'm not going to stop you. It's not illegal. And so what? It strikes me, his epistemological system strikes me as amounting to just anointing whatever your priors are as being legitimate. And it's fine to do that, but what do you get out of that? Not very much.
This video is subjective. However, you will have to bite a lot of bullets. The first objection against all three theories is infallibility. Do you think you can be wrong about moral matters? If you ever watch a video of what's going on in, say, factory farming, you ever ask yourself, like, shit, am I making a mistake? So if you think that's even possible in the first place, then you have to reject individual subjectivism. But this also applies to just a little bit lesser extent to cultural subjectivism.
This is false. So nothing about subjectivism or any of these relativist positions entails or requires infallibility. So the assumption that Christian and others that make this argument make is that we somehow are incapable of being incorrect about what our own preferences are. In other words, suppose as a subjectivist you say moral facts are determined by what my or your preferences are. They're determined by the preferences of individuals or the values of individuals. Okay, so then if I have a given set of preferences, then I know what the moral facts are. Like as long as I prefer that people not murder, it's true relative to my standards that people should not murder. Now, this relies on the assumption you cannot be mistaken about what your preferences are. Is that a logical entailment of subjectivism? No, it's not a logical entailment of subjectivism. Subjectivists are not committed to infallibility about perfect introspective access to our own preferences. This is a point I made in my dissertation. I made it on this channel many times. Think of the book, if you haven't read it, I'm going to tell you about it. The Dr. Seuss book, Green Eggs and Ham. So here's what happens in Green Eggs and Ham. There's a guy sitting reading a newspaper or something, and somebody named Sam I Am approaches him and says, would you like green eggs and ham? Would you like them here or there? And this person says, I do not like green eggs and ham. I do not want them, or I do not like them, Sam I Am. Now, Sam I Am continues to pester the unnamed, I think he's unnamed, protagonist in the book by saying, would you like them with a fox? Would you like them in a box? Would you like them here or there? And he keeps responding, I would not like them here or there. I would not like them in a box. I would not like them with a fox. Now, eventually, after a long train of pestering, there's a literal train in there too. Eventually, this character says, look, if I try the green eggs and ham, will you leave me alone? And Sam I Am is like, yeah, here they are. Here's the green eggs and ham. And he tries them and he says, say, I do like green eggs and ham. I do like them, Sam I Am. I would eat them in a box, and I would eat them with a fox, and I would eat them on the train, and I would eat them in the rain. Now, this is a story for children. It's a great story. Often children are reluctant to try foods if they find them weird. I don't like it. I don't like it. Now, what is it that this character discovered? He believed he did not like green eggs and ham. He tried green eggs and ham. He discovered he liked green eggs and ham. You can be mistaken about your own preferences. This is something that we literally teach children. So where do philosophers come off with the idea that we're infallible about our preferences? This objection isn't just wrong. It's not just wrong. Let me be clear. This is fucking silly. It's silliness. This is a terrible objection. Of course you could be incorrect about what your own preferences are. Of course you are. Has anyone ever heard of a person struggling with their sexual orientation? Are they certain of what their preferences are? No, people struggle with this. It's not obvious to people. This is something people experience as children, as adolescents, as adults, as elderly people. People struggle with what their own preferences are. People are not sure what job would be best for them. Even when they're deliberating with what would make me happy, they're not sure what would make them happy. They're not sure what their value should be. Absolutely nothing about the idea of subjectivity presupposes, requires, or in any way entails infallibility. This is a ridiculous objection. This needs to get put in a box and shipped way out to sea. This is a stupid objection. I'm very sorry, Christian. It's not that this isn't like an objection worth considering, but actually it's mistaken. This is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Why do people keep pressing dumb objections like this? Now, so I'm being very harsh on the objection, not on Christian. This is a bad objection. And it's bad. It's bad in a way where it's overdetermined. In other words, it's so bad that even if I was wrong about this, it would still be bad. Here's why. There's another reason why this is a very terrible objection. The objection is supposed to go something like this. We are infallible. We're not infallible about our moral standards. I don't know if I could have. Shit, I hate when I try to make a formal argument off the top of my head. I'm not even gonna fucking bother. My brain just goes, and I can't spell words. This happens when I try writing on a marker board and suddenly I can't spell basic words. Man, I will fuck up a modus ponens in real time for no reason. I'm not gonna try. Okay, so the basic reasoning goes something like this. The subjectivist position is supposed to hold that we're infallible. We're not infallible, so the subjectivist position is wrong. Now, formalize that however you want. Modus ponens, modus tollens, whatever. Now, the point here is that the assumption that we're infallible relies on the assumption that it's not the case that our moral standards are based on our values. And so it would be question begging to appeal to that consideration as a reason to consider subjectivism false. Here's why. Okay, so let's say you're inclined towards moral realism. Now, someone presents subjectivism and they say, hey, here's an alternative perspective. Moral claims are actually just referencing our preferences. Now, you as the person inclined towards realism, you yourself think that we're infallible about our preferences. That's not an issue. So if someone says, I like chocolate more than vanilla, they're infallible about it. They couldn't be wrong about it. If someone says they think stealing is wrong, they're infallible about it. They couldn't be wrong about it. Now, you already think that as the realist if you think we're infallible about our preferences. Okay, now hold that like put that in the bank. All right, you think we're infallible about our preferences, and then you're a realist. And now the anti-realist subjectivist is saying, hey, moral claims are actually claims about those preferences. Well, then you trivially think that we're infallible about our preferences. Now, if you reject that because you don't think we're infallible about our preferences, then the only way you could think that, if you think we're infallible, the only way you could think we couldn't be infallible about our moral values is if you already did not think that they were our preferences. So someone suggesting that they're our preferences wouldn't be a good reason for saying, hey, that would entail we're infallible about them. That's absurd because you yourself think we're infallible about our preferences. So in other words, if subjectivism is true, it's trivially true that if you already grant that we're infallible about our preferences, then we're infallible about the moral claims. What's the objection? What's the objection? It's not absurd if they actually are our preferences. And if we're infallible about our preferences, what's absurd about that? Nothing. There's nothing absurd about it. Yeah, I mean, the only thing I find absurd about it is the idea that we're infallible about our preferences and the notion that subjectivists are somehow committed to that. So it's one problem. It's not true that subjectivism entails infallibility about our preferences, and then there's no particularly good reason to think that we are. Two, if for whatever reason you think we're infallible about our preferences, then insofar as subjectivism reduces moral truths to claims about our preferences, you shouldn't find anything especially absurd about saying we're now, okay, well, then we're infallible about our moral standards because you already grant that we're infallible about our preferences. And so you would be committed to us being infallible about our preferences. And the view is saying, hey, moral standards are expressions of our preferences. They're statements about our preferences. Okay, so then we're infallible about them. What's the problem? Now, if you balk at that and go, okay, but I don't think of morality that way, fine. Then you don't think of morality in subjective terms. That's not a good objection to subjectivism. Your objection to subjectivism is you don't accept subjectivism. How the fuck is that an objection? Like, so it's, oh, but I have an intuition that we couldn't be infallible about them. Okay, this is a covert way of just saying something like you have an intuition that they're not our preferences. So what people using this argument do is they're leveraging the idea that it's somehow silly to think people could not be mistaken about their moral standards. And then because you look at people and go, oh, I was wrong about that. And they change their mind about stuff. And they leverage those sorts of folk observations to give the impression that subjectivism would somehow say none of that could happen. We couldn't like reconsider or deliberate or be wrong about anything. It says that, but actually we do these things. And so there's an inconsistency between our observations of ordinary thought and language, the way that people speak and think about morality. They revise their positions. They think their previous positions were incorrect, that sort of thing. And they leverage those observations and say, okay, subjectivism would predict that we shouldn't do that. We do that. So that's inconsistent with subjectivism. So two things. One, it's false that subjectivism would commit us to that. And two, even if we did all those things, there would be nothing particularly, like what subjectivism. Well, sorry, let me put it this way. If subjectivism did entail absolute infallibility about these sorts of things, then it might predict this might result in some inconsistencies with our observed practices and behaviors. So if they really think that, then you look at these sorts of practices, then you might notice a disparity there. But then that's an issue with your assumptions about whether or not subjectivism really commits one to infallibility. So, one philosopher's modus ponens is another's modus tollens. What we should observe then is, because you look at these observations, right? People reconsider their views. They reflect, I was wrong about my previous moral standards. If you look at that and go, okay, that's not what I would expect if people were subjectivists, because if it was just an expression of your preferences, you shouldn't be able to be mistaken about it. There's two routes you could go. One route you could go is, okay, so then they're not subjectivists. Another route you could go is, oh, actually, let's just suppose for a moment, put on your hat and think, put on your subjectivist hat and go, okay, these really are expressions of values. How would we make sense of that? Oh, okay, people can lack perfect introspective access to what their own values are. They can be mistaken about their values. And personally, I find that to be quite obvious. I don't take me finding it obvious to be a reason for you to find it obvious. What I want you to do is think about all these cases, not of morality, but cases of preferences. People can reconsider their life choices. They can reconsider their taste preferences, their music preferences. Let's say a person doesn't like fish. I don't like fish. I don't like fish. You finally sit them down and you go, well, look, why don't you like fish? And they're like, I got a fillet of fish at McDonald's once. It was nasty. Something like that. I don't actually think they're particularly nasty, but let's say they say that. And you go, okay, hold on. Let me take you to a seafood place. And you take them to like the best seafood place. And they go, oh, I just had fish that wasn't good or something like that. People often revise their perspective on what their preferences are. This is really not an issue for people. And I think that critics of the subjectivist view have a very naive and impoverished understanding of human psychology, where they don't appreciate how opaque who we are can be to us. And I find this strange because I think that in other contexts, those very same people might very well recognize that people can struggle with their sexual orientation or their career choices or their food preferences or what kind of house they want to live in or where they want to move to. People struggle with preferences, things that they themselves would say, this is absolutely a matter of preferences. I do not think there's an objective fact of the matter about what career I should pursue or, who I should have a romantic relationship with. It's up to me, right? People would be very, very committed to that. And then also say, I'm not sure. And they could say, I was wrong. I made a mistake and I'm doing something different. I think that's an obvious thing that occurs. And I think that this basically refutes the notion that subjectivism entails infallibility. I'm curious what you all think. I've been talking for a while. So let me pop open the live and do a poll. So let's do a poll on whether you think people can be mistaken about their preferences. Whoop. Can people be mistaken about their preferences? As always, I don't know option. And let's see what you all think. Okay, I've been talking a while. So let me have a look at the chat and then we'll keep going with the video. Oh, wow, that's a lot of comments. Lofa says, loving the frequency of Lance streams lately. Yeah, I was busy for a couple weeks. So, it's nice to be back. All right. Jacob Steisen says, how would a NAN not believing but not taking a stand or Christian or something else, you ever get to the point of understanding this? And not just live in some type of circle of confusion. Is this true? I'm not sure what you're referencing. Frotten Inferno says there's a DVD not clip you wanted to show in the first part of this review demonstrating he's still making empirical claims he denied making. Did I miss it? No, I haven't shown that. I wanted to get through the Christian stuff. Maybe I'll show it at the end of this. I can never remember which one it is. I'm so sorry. And I know it's happened like 30 times. I'm so sorry. An error theorist can make the proposition without any expression of the attitude. Yeah, they can. They could or they could not. It's either one. Or commitment to the attitude about the proposition, if I'm understanding you correctly. Yeah, so basically a person could say, look, I don't think an error theorist could say, look, it's not wrong, technically speaking, but it is wrong. It's nasty. It's awful. It's repugnant. So they, sometimes they endorse a fictionalism where they say, look, technically everybody's speaking about something that's not real, but there's a close enough practical analog, and I'm going to endorse that. So yeah, error theorists I don't really think they have a problem with this. But even if they did, so what? Then don't be an error theorist. Yeah, Sapir says, it's so weird to decide what anyone and everyone means when they use a particular phrase by analysis. How do philosophers think this makes sense or even take it seriously? I have no idea. I don't know what they take themselves to be doing when they say that moral claims mean this. Whose moral claims? It's like if you said punches are mean. Punches are mean and violent. Which punches? Who's punching who and why are they punching them? Like you need context for these things. Knives are sharp. Which ones? Because I could get like a toy knife that's a rubber knife. That's not sharp. Like it matters what reference class you're talking about. Which moral claims are propositions? Which ones are not propositions? And how do you determine this by thinking about English sentences? Why would that be an effective method? This is like making sweeping judgments about all feline behavior by thinking about how your house cat used to act. It's ridiculous and it doesn't make sense. And I don't know what they take themselves to be doing. I don't think they know what they're doing. I don't think it's, I don't know what they're doing. I think they don't know what they're doing. Yeah, so Lezo says, I don't even know how to distinguish the intuition. X is stance independently wrong from X is wrong. Well, it just seems stance independent somehow. It's an intellectual seeming. And if you got an issue with that, tough shit. You're conceptually deficient. Maybe you have brain damage. I'm not being serious, by the way. This is what people say to me. Yeah, I don't know what it's supposed to feel like introspectively for something to feel stance independently wrong. Like, I mean, if you're applying some theoretical assumption, but I don't know how that could bubble up from your perception of the world or your engagement with the world. I don't know how it could seem that way rather than you just thinking that it's that way. Like, can it seem like the theory of evolution is true? Can it seem like general relativity is true? Can it seem like Queen Elizabeth was the Queen of England? Can it seem that way? I mean, if you're going to say yes to that, like, what isn't encompassed by this seemings talk? It just, it's something very sketchy about it. It starts to incorporate all sorts of stuff. It's one thing I really wonder too, because in the debate, I started listening to the debate that Humor had with somebody, and they kept making the point that there's, for Humor, he's stuck with it. It seems all the way down, and he basically agrees. But when it comes to these sorts of intellectual seemings, the other person kept emphasizing that when it comes to the sciences and empirical stuff, we have independent methods of corroborating people's empirical claims. We have no independent methods of corroborating seemings. And so, if a person went around saying, look, because Humor thinks he has intellectual seemings that give him justified belief in moral realism. What if a person sincerely believes they have divine seemings? They think they're getting messages from God in their head and they tell them something else. How could we show that that person is mistaken? Aren't they justified in their divine seemings? Like, what kind of seemings are you not justified in endorsing? And is it really that they would be justified, but then we would have to override them with defeaters? And what would those defeaters look like? Because a person could always say, look, my divine seeming, they could say this, they could make a divine Morian shift. They could say, any objection to the reality of my divine seemings would be more implausible than the reality of my divine seemings, because they're so lucid, they're so clearly real, that nothing could be more obvious than that God is sending me direct messages that are true. That would make this person incorrigible. And let's assume this is totally not true. The person's hallucinating or they're delusional. You couldn't argue them out of that. They'd be incorrigible. And I worry that Humor's conception of intellectual seemings, because it's not an empiricist view, it's this rationalist view, makes it incorrigible. It's impossible to show that a person with sufficiently strong seemings could be wrong. And so, it can pay lip service all day long to this idea that it's defeasible, but it could be defeasible in principle, but not defeasible in practice. And I think that is something that's going on with people like Humor. I don't know that, given the epistemic system he's operating with, he's actually incorrigible in practice for his moral realism. Good to see someone using the term Jacobian ethics. Truth tingles. I love that term. I coined it, so it's a little narcissistic to say I love it, but I love it. I was happy I came up with that. Maybe I got it from someone. They get out the credit. I just want the term to get out there. All right. People talk to each other. Sapir, I didn't forget. Maybe I said that I was going to show it at the beginning of this, and I forgot to do that. Yeah, this is true. Travis says the entailments of moral propositions also aren't immediately obvious to people. Yeah, I just find this idea that subjectivism entails infallibility to just be outrageous. And he does say it's a lesser extent in cultural relativism. You could genuinely not know what your culture approves of or disapproves of. Like a child might not know. So yeah, I mean, it's certainly cultural relativism wouldn't commit you to infallibility. None of these views actually commit you to infallibility. Front and Inferno says, speaking of Michael Humor, Donahue brought up the idea of debating him once again in your recent interview. You agreed. No, nothing has been set up. I wait for people to message me. I don't want to bother Humor. But yeah, I'd absolutely talk to him again. Says, I've been wrong about my preferences before, or they've changed over time. Yeah, see? Bardo says, seemings don't really make much sense to me. I'm not even sure what they are. So when Humer talks about seemings, he wants to collapse stuff like visual perception. Like it seems to me there's a tree over there. Seemings are appearances. So you get these terms, seemings, appearances. It's that something appears to be the case, even if you ultimately conclude that it's not the case. So it's supposed to be this general category. And so it would be a mistake for me to just bluntly state seemings aren't real, but I don't like that terminology. So I will say, I don't accept the seemings talk. I don't think there are seemings. Like, but if he says, look, I'm stipulating perceptions or seemings, sure, I think there's perceptions, but I don't want to call those seemings. If he just says, look, I just insist those are seemings, fine. Then there's some kinds of seemings. But that move can then allow one to say, look, there's perceptual seemings and then there's intellectual seemings. And accepting the former doesn't require you to accept the latter. I don't think intellectual seemings are a real type of psychological state. It does not seem to me that 2 + 2 = 4. I believe that it's the case. I might say I know that it's the case, but I don't have any special phenomenology associated with how I think about philosophical cases or mathematics or anything like that. Noah asks, could you explain a bit about how metaethical issues are important? I don't think they are important. Couldn't it be said that from the perspective of society, normative stances, what we value, et cetera, are what matter? Yes. Yeah, metaethics is not important. People should stop doing it. Yeah, so Travis points this out. Individual subjectivism is not exhausted by the view that X is good or right, or X translates to I approve of X. This is a great point. And, Christian engaged with this in a blog post where he went through more nuanced versions of subjectivism that increasingly elaborate on the view. It's kind of funny because critics of the anti-realist positions frequently present the crudest and least defensible versions of these views, critique those, and just move on. And they don't engage at all with these more complicated views. There are more complicated subjectivist views. I think that I don't like any of the ones that Christian discusses. I think that they elaborate on things in a goofy, analytic way that's not very defensible. I think that an easier one is this more deflationary one, where something like I actually think you could get away without much issue with saying X is good or right. I wouldn't say it translates to I approve of X because there's sometimes going to be some issues with translation, but you can cash that out in a way where it's descriptive and it doesn't. So, okay, let me put it this way. The standard framings of subjectivism end up doing this reification thing where it works something like this. I prefer, right? So let's say I disapprove of murder. I disapprove of stealing. Okay, I disapprove of stealing. On these standard views, that makes it the case that stealing is wrong from my perspective. It would be wrong for me to steal. It'd be wrong I would judge other people to be wrong, doing something wrong if they steal, right? And so the attitude generates a normative moral fact that is now independent of the attitude itself. This is that reification stuff where the subjectivists, even the anti-realist positions, end up like creating norms and generating properties. And an anti-realist doesn't have to think that. They can be a more deflationary, more naturalistic anti-realist that says, look, you can just understand the language of things being morally good or bad, right or wrong, in terms of it being expressions of approval and disapproval, and there are no further facts. So it's not that if I approve of something, it makes it the case that it's good for me to do it. It's just that to say that it's good for me to do it is just to say it's consistent with my preferences. And there's no further facts. This is a more reductive view. So call this reductive subjectivism. I don't think it has any of the issues that Christian or other people raise against any of these views. He claims here that these views have to bite a lot of bullets. They don't bite any bullets. They don't really have any problems. All right. Awesome. Thanks for the $10. I really appreciate it. And I'm sorry, I always forget how to say your name. I'm such an idiot. But I'm going to be honest about it. I could pretend like one of the things I do is when I don't know people's names is I just reference them in a bunch of ways other than using their name. I'm horrible with names. So I teach courses and I always struggle to remember students' names. I recognize students, I learn them, and eventually I know their names, but it's a really struggle for me. it's something I grew up with where I didn't really interact with a lot of people when I was very young. I didn't really make eye contact. I didn't interact with people, and I didn't learn people's names. I form a profile in my head of people largely based on their like attitude, vibes, beliefs, shared interests, like what interests overlap with mine, that sort of thing. But names have always felt a little strange to me. So I don't know what it is. I'm so sorry about that. But anyway, your Git's comments, or Jit, is it Jit? Shit. This is really stupid that I'm getting it wrong this many times. Anyway, especially because you're giving me money. So it just feels like disrespect on my end, and I'm very sorry for that. Anyway, you say, thanks for the lives, Lance. You've influenced the way I think about morality. Really appreciate your time. I'm glad that I'm influencing you on this. It's funny because someone just asked about metaethics, and I'm saying it's not that important. You have all these academics debating all these issues, right? And I'll just leave this up here because I appreciate it. You have all these academics debating these abstract issues. And so you might think, oh, well, if you don't think this is important, why are you arguing about it? Well, I'm arguing about it because other people are occupying this intellectual space that could be taken up. Like it could be that our universities and our colleges and our high schools and wherever they're teaching moral philosophy, they could teach better moral philosophy that's grounded in a pragmatic, empiricist view of the world that's more practically oriented, that views morality as this socially constructed system in which people negotiate, form, develop, and enforce values that further our interests. And that conflict with others is a matter of navigating conflicts in both your beliefs and your conflicting values without the presumption that there are underlying truths that you're mutually trying to discover. Because there aren't any truths like that. It's a nonsense idea, and it's a waste of time to think in those terms. And so what I'd like people to do is reorient their philosophical perspective. And I want to do that by dissolving abstract areas of analytic philosophy that I take to be empty, useless, nonsense ideas because of the presuppositions and commitments that have motivated people engaging in these practices. One thing that's very frustrating about analytic philosophy is that if you look at charts of like standardized tests and GPAs and all the whatever other metrics you take of competence or success, philosophy draws in, it siphons off a lot of talent that I think is then largely wasted on practically irrelevant abstract philosophical issues. That's a bad thing. And what I want those philosophers to do is either do productive philosophy or stop doing philosophy. And I'm dead serious about that. It's like if 70% of medicine was dedicated to astrology or crystal magic. You could imagine a person saying, look, I don't think crystal magic is important. That's why I'm here. I'm trying to convince you to stop doing crystal magic. Please go do real medicine. I feel that way about most of analytic philosophy, that people need to stop doing it and they need to do something useful, both for their own good and for society's good, especially because, and often there's an underlying hint of antagonism here, but it's not antagonistic. If I thought that they were just a bunch of stupid, useless idiots, I would ignore them. But it's actually that you have these really smart people that I think are wasting their lives on stuff that's not very valuable. So anyway, I'm glad that I've influenced you. I'm sorry I brought up the name thing so many times. I'm genuinely embarrassed about it, and it bothers me. And I don't like to bullshit and pretend stuff doesn't bother me when it does. So, well, I sometimes I do, but I'm trying to make an active effort not to. But glad I've had an influence on you. All right. Wow, I've been in so many comments, I haven't even gone back to the video. There's a game on. Are people watching Lance or Spain versus France? We got that World Cup going on. Front and Inferno says, I saw the debate. It came out about a day ago, and it was titled Debating Ethical Intuitionism. Is it right? Humor believes basically any epistemological framework needs seemings. Yeah, he thinks you can't get away from seemings, and the only way to reject it is if it seemed to you. But I don't buy that framework at all. I don't believe I have intellectual seemings. So, if I talk to Humor again, I'd like to report to him. I don't rely on seemings. Like if he's entitled to report that he has seemings, and we don't need to do any empirical work to show that he does, am I not entitled to say that I don't have them? And I don't need to do empirical work to show that I don't have them? Because if so, okay, I'm reporting I do not have them, and yet I'm able to think and navigate the world anyway. And so the claim that you have to have seemings is false because I operate without them. And I'm dead serious about that. Like, if we're accepting his epistemological assumptions, it looks like I'm entitled to say that. So either there's a problem with his epistemological assumptions. I don't know what his epistemological assumptions are, and I'm wrong about that, which is certainly possible. Or there's a problem with his views about the necessity of seemings. So there's something off about that. Okay, it is Jet. Okay, damn it. I struggle a bit with establishing a view, so to speak, but there's clarity here in my personal experience as well. Yeah, I don't think you have to have a view on these matters. A lot of people like to because I go around saying I'm an anti-realist. I'm committed to that. But you will see a lot of philosophers, and I don't think there's anything wrong with this, saying I'm 50-50 on this, I'm 60-40 on this. I don't see a huge problem with that. I do think it's a little silly when people are like Bayesians about things and they're like, my prior is 0.731. It's like, it reminds me of Spock, like, Captain, there's a 0.02% chance that, as if he could calculate statistics like that. It gives the faux sense of intellectual respectability. And I think some people do that with like bogus pseudo Bayesian stuff. But there's nothing wrong with being unsure of what view to have. Yeah, Jit says the strength is appraiser relativism here, I think. Right. So appraiser relativism just doesn't really struggle with the issues, the typical issues that critics have with relativist views. And I'd like to see what Christian has to say about that. Bardo says, Lance, if you were to do a devil's advocate debate, how would you go about defending realism? That's a tough one. It's tough because it's something I should be able to do, but I think I would really struggle with it. What would I do? I don't know. I don't know what I would do. I'd have to really sit down and think about it, and not give it a half-assed thought. All right, let's continue with the video.
Sometimes you look around your society and you go, guys, I think we're fucking up. But if that's true, then both individuals and societies can make a mistake. But then what determines what's right? At that point, you might say, okay, God determines what's right. But there's a few issues with that. First is,
yeah, so if you're a cultural relativist and you disagree with your society, that might be a little weird. Like if you think your society determines what's right or wrong, and you think your society holds a particular view, then it would be inconsistent to go, okay, but they're wrong anyway. That's a little weird. It could be that you think, but if you have the reductive cultural relativist view, you could think something like this. To say that an action is right or wrong in my society is just to say it's consistent or inconsistent with the standards of my culture. But you could just go, but I don't like the standards of my culture. I'm against those standards. And in that case, you might struggle to convey that. Like if you said, so their standards are wrong, that might not make sense. And like, it might be internally incoherent to say that, but there wouldn't really be an issue with being against the standards. So as long as you're careful about the language, that really wouldn't be an issue. Now, people probably wouldn't say things that way. That could mean a couple of things. One, ordinary people are not cultural relativists, or at least don't speak that way in certain contexts. That's fine. I don't think that they are. Or it could be that people are, but they have inconsistent, sloppy, confused views. Both of those are possibilities. But his treatment of it is so superficial and quick here that it's very hard to say much more about it.
The famous Euthyphro dilemma. Does God say something's right because it's right? Or is something right because God said it's right? Because if God is the one who just arbitrarily says whatever he wants, he could say baby torture is right tomorrow, and then would that make it right? I don't think so. But if God says things are right because they are actually right, then it's something external to God that makes things right. Some external objective standard. That's no longer divine command theory. And the last issue is, of course, God might not exist. The second objection against all three theories is that seemingly...
Okay, he didn't say much about divine command theory, but proponents of divine command theory have critical responses to both the Euthyphro dilemma and to the suggestion that their position makes morality stance dependent. I'm not familiar enough with them to do them justice, but from what I've seen from people that are knowledgeable of philosophy of religion and its intersection with metaethics, it looks like they're pretty satisfied that there are conceptions of divine command theory that do not commit one to some type of anti-realism or not subjectivism. Also, using the term relativism and subjectivism here is a little bit misleading because there's a difference between the truth of moral claims being indexed to one or more of competing standards. That's a good way of understanding relativism. And then the notion that they're dependent on stances. Those are orthogonal to one another. You can have relativism without stance dependence. So basically you could have What if you relativize moral standards to one's astrological sign, then they're relative, but they're not stance dependent. And you could have stance dependence without relativism. So divine command theory would be one potential example if it was construed in a way that did result in stance dependence. But there's, it depends on your metaphysics and your conception of God, and the relation that you believe that there are between the moral facts and God's values or standards. So, a Christian might say something like God is good, and it's not the case that God, it's not like a matter of God's stances. They don't fix what's good. They follow necessarily from God's nature or something like that. And so God isn't, they're not whims. They're not expressions of God's preferences. They're extensions of God's nature, will, and being, something like that. So they're going to have ways of getting around that, where once you have a better understanding of their metaphysical conception of the nature of God, it's not so clear that there's any straightforward sense in which the position commits them to some type of stance dependence. But you can have types of stance dependent non-relativist accounts. That's why I don't think subjectivism or relativism are the right term for this category the Christian is using that he's getting from humor. I don't think this is a very precise term, because it conflates the indexicality of the truth status of moral claims from the stance dependence of the truth status of moral claims. Those should come apart. And really what's at issue here isn't the relativism, it's the stance dependence. And you do have positions that are stance dependent accounts. There are constructivist accounts that are stance dependent that are not relativistic. And you have, for instance, ideal observer theory, which holds that correct moral actions determined by the standards that an ideally coherent and completely perfectly rational being would endorse. There's only a single set of standards, moral standards, that are true, so it's not relativistic. And yet they're still dependent on a hypothetical stance, so they're stance dependent. And so those conceptions come apart. I do hope that in future updates to the book that humor will go into that, or adopt different terminology that doesn't potentially conflate those in readers' minds. I don't think Christian is pulling this apart here. These are shorter videos, so you can give them a break on that front, but not much of one.
Really bad, horrible things can be arbitrarily determined to be good one day. If everyone woke up and some mad scientist changed all of our brain chemistry and we all thought, hey, human sacrifice is good, actually, that doesn't seem like it would make human sacrifice good. It seems like it's...
Yeah, so it doesn't seem like it would make human sacrifice good. Well, if you take the reductive relativist view, all it would mean to say that something is good is that people approve of it. So it would be trivially true that if we all woke up and approved of human sacrifice, that we would in fact approve of human sacrifice. So if the statement, it is good to engage in human sacrifice, expressed in a particular context, is indexed to the standards of people that are in favor of it, and what it means is something like, these people approve of human sacrifice, and they do approve of human sacrifice, the statement is trivially true. And so it would make sense to say it doesn't seem that way. There's some ambiguity there. It doesn't seem that way. What? It doesn't seem consistent with your moral standards, because it's not consistent with my moral standards that if there were a society, I won't care about what other people think. So if other people woke up suddenly and were in favor of human sacrifice, I would be against them being in favor of human sacrifice, and I'd still be against human sacrifice. So as long as we're indexing things to my current actual values, any alternative set of values, including a hypothetical, like imagine some other version of me woke up approving of human sacrifice. I, the real me, would be against that other version of me. But it's trivially true that if I woke up, and now we're talking about that hypothetical perspective version of me, and that version of me approved of human sacrifice, that version of me would think it's good. And there would be no further fact of the matter. All there are facts about what we approve or disapprove of. And what we're doing is we're reducing the normative moral language to descriptive language about what is or isn't consistent with a given set of standards. So as long as we're clear about which standard is being indexed, what he's saying here doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It might be smuggling in realist assumptions. So if he's not smuggling in realist assumptions, he could be indexing things to his own values, which would just be consistent with relativism. In other words, if I'm a relativist and I'm against human sacrifice, and you tell me there's hypothetical people that approve of human sacrifice, well, I'm still against it. So it's still wrong relative to my standards. You can't change that, right? You can't change my actual standards in a hypothetical. You can only change my hypothetical standards in a hypothetical. And so as long as we're indexing our normative moral evaluations to our actual standards, then things aren't going to change. And so it could give the impression, oh, look, we still would think baby torture is wrong, even if everyone approved of baby torture. Yes, I am an anti-realist. I think baby torture would still be wrong, even if everybody approved of it, because I don't approve of it, right? So as long as we're clear on that, it's very easy for me to say that I don't approve of it. It would still be wrong. But if you say, but the version of you, would it be wrong relative to their standards? Well, if by relative to their standard, if we're talking about this reductive account, if what you're asking me, if a version of you approved of baby torture, would that version of you approve of baby torture? Yes, obviously. What the fuck is the objection to that? This is trivially true. So again, there are not good objections to this type of reductive appraisal relativism. If you want to start adding in the weird irreducible normativity and weird reification stuff, though, that's what's at issue with those, not the intuitive implausibility of the view. So, these objections rely on underspecificity, conflations, equivocation, lack of clarity, ambiguity, like weird modal stuff with hypothetical versions of yourself. I don't know that any of this is malicious or intentional. I don't think that it is, but I think Christian and others are confused. And I think that they're making pretty basic errors. And I think it's pretty easy to point them out.
Just a bad thing to do in general. Like, that's the intuition I have. If you agree with that.
I don't care if you have that intuition. I don't have that intuition. Sorry, Christian, I don't give a shit what your intuitions are. Like, I don't care. So like this mongering of intuitions is so pointless.
Intuition, and that's reason to reject subjectivism. If you don't care, you can be a perfectly consistent subjectivist.
Good. Then I'll be one.
Sacrifice and torture could be totally fine. The last point.
Yeah, if by totally fine you mean if I approved of it, I approved of it.
More anthropological, but it's impossible to make sense of disagreement if you're a subjectivist, because moral facts just come down to like your opinion. Nonsense.
This is total nonsense. So I already talked about this in the last video. I have a whole blog post about it. I'm just going to post it here. And I'm not going to belabor the point. Where is it? So the claim is if you're a subjectivist, you can't handle disagreement. It's not true at all. Where is that post? Wow, it's way older than I thought that it was. Gotta scroll down. Scroll in. Here it is. The article is called Moral Relativism and Repugnant Implications. I'll put it here. Go check it out. The basic idea is that the notion that subjectivists couldn't have genuine disagreements is predicated on a fundamental misconception about what disagreement entails or requires of people. It's based on the narrow conception that disagreement consists exclusively of conflicting beliefs about the truth status of a propositional claim. So disagreement is, I think P, you think not P. Disagreements are not restricted to that. That's a narrow propositional conception of disagreement. Disagreements can also be conflicts of goals or values. And if I subjectively value having your wallet and you subjectively value not giving your wallet to me, we have a conflict, not just about our beliefs, but about what we want to occur. And subjectivists have no problem having practical disagreements of that kind. They do not have to disagree about the truth status of propositional claims. So this claim is false. It's either false or it's trivially true. It's trivially true if you narrowly construe disagreement in a way that excludes subjectivist accounts because it construes disagreements as disputes about what the facts are, and subjectivists don't dispute what the facts are. Okay, then they're incapable of disagreements of the relevant kind. But let's call those philosophical disagreements. That's a separate question from when people are disagreeing out in the world, whether their disagreement is in fact, sorry, I shouldn't call them philosophical. Let's call them propositional disagreements. So there's propositional disagreements and there's, what are we going to call them? Practical disagreements. Okay, so practical disagreement is when I want something and you want something else and there's a conflict in what we want. A propositional disagreement is when I think P is true or false and you think the contrary. Okay, so is it possible for subjectivists to have propositional disagreements with other people with conflicting values? Narrowly construed, no. Like there are ways in which they probably could. But let's just say I hold the subjective value that it's not okay to torture people, and another subjectivist holds, and I'm just being a subjectivist for the sake of argument here, another subjectivist holds the view that it is okay to torture people and they're about to torture somebody. Okay, as a subjectivist that's anti-torture, I'm going to try to stop them. Do we disagree about anything propositionally? Well, we both agree they're trying to torture somebody. I agree that they think it's okay to torture people and that it's good relative to their standards. And they agree that it's wrong relative to my standards and that I'm committed to trying to stop them. There's no facts we disagree about. We don't have a propositional disagreement. So what should I do in that situation? There's no propositional disagreement. They're about to torture somebody. I could stop them. I could call the police or I could punch them or restrain them or something and stop them from the torture. And in fact, they're like, look, if you try to stop me, I'm not going to do it. I'll run away. We're not gonna have a life or death battle here. Are you gonna let me torture this person? So the subjectivist, if all disagreements were propositional disputes, they'll go, oh, I guess not. But of course, they would try to. I would try to stop them. Now, even though we have no conflicts in propositional views, right? There's no conflicting beliefs. Why? Because we have a practical disagreement. The disagreement is about what should occur. I don't want that to happen, so I'm going to try to stop them. Now, real world disagreements. Can people have practical disagreements without propositional disagreements? Yes, they can. Do they? Yes, I think they do. And so merely stating that if you're a subjectivist, you can't have propositional disagreements doesn't show that there's anything absurd about everyday behavior. And it doesn't have any real practical significance because disputes about beliefs aren't necessary for understanding or making sense of actual conflicts between people. Those conflicts can be entirely construed in terms of practical disagreements without any need to include propositional disagreements in the mix. So this is a common objection to subjectivist views and other sorts of views that disagreement would be impossible. It relies on a narrow conception of disagreement that construes it exclusively in propositional terms. And then it gives the misleading and false impression that this would somehow mean that the actual disputes and conflicts we observe in the real world would somehow be inconsistent with subjectivism. This is false because what neither Christian nor anyone else has shown is that those disagreements are somehow disputes about what the stance-independent moral facts are. They have not shown that. And so this argument relies on, I think, an implicit equivocation between, or an implicit, not equivocation, a conflation between instances of moral conflict in the real world and this abstract theoretical conception of a propositional disagreement. And they want to argue in these very narrow analytic terms that the propositional disagreements are impossible given a particular metaethical view, which, even if true, doesn't necessarily spill over or carry over into the disputes in the real world. In order to show that they do, what you would first have to show is that those disputes are disputes about stance-independent facts. But notice that they're trying to use this argument to show that they are disputes about stance-independent moral facts, but they'd have to show that they are in order for the argument to work. So this argument goes nowhere. It does not work. They would have to first prove the very thing that they're assuming in order for this argument to work. This is not just a bad argument. It's a shit argument. It's a very bad argument. So imagine me trying to get that published in a paper. This argument is shit. And I have people complain about this. Lance says everything is bullshit. No, I don't say everything is bullshit. But a lot of criticisms of anti-realist positions are, in fact, bullshit. That does not mean everything is bullshit. I think I was actually that hilarious bookbinder. Yeah, he's the guy that said I say everything is bullshit. No, I don't. I don't think, look, you don't think I've read, okay. I used to be a Christian and I didn't know much about evolution. Now, I wasn't super anti-evolution. I wasn't a creationist or anything, but this actually happened to me. I was in a bookstore. It was Borders bookstore. Or it could have been a Barnes & Noble. One of the two. I think it was Borders. And I saw this book, The Blind Watchmaker. It's a book by Richard Dawkins. I didn't know who Richard Dawkins was. At least I don't think I did. And I got the book and I read it and I was like, holy crap, this is amazing. So I wasn't just convinced, oh, clearly the theory of evolution by natural selection is true. I was convinced it's one of the coolest ideas. And this is something Dan Dennett later said, that the theory of evolution by natural selection is the best idea anyone has ever had. I agree with him. I found that persuasive. That wasn't bullshit. I've been persuaded by a lot of arguments, but these arguments are not good. These objections to anti-realism are not good. That does not mean that I think all objections to everything and all of analytic philosophy are bad objections. I don't think that. I'm not going to sit here and read a bunch of arguments I think are good. What would be the point of that? I mean, I could, but I don't want to do that. I'm going to talk about what arguments I think are bad. This is my channel. I get to talk about what I want. I like doing critique. If other people don't like that, don't watch my channel. But the mere fact that they're observing this selection effect where I actively go out of my way to have a channel where I critique stuff does not mean that I think everything is critiquable. That's silly. This is a very silly way of construing what I think. Bardo asked, what got you into philosophy originally? You know what? I don't even know. I don't even know at this point. I don't know. I just started reading philosophy and eventually I was doing it. I don't know why. It seems like a natural part of my personality. I was philosophically oriented as a child. I remember I have a much older brother, and I remember having big, long conversations. This was out in the back porch in Florida, in the Florida heat with a few fireflies. I don't even think there are anymore. Mosquitoes. We got our pool there. I remember they'd sit out in the back. chilling, drinking, and lawn chairs, and we get all philosophical. And I was like 8 or 9 or 10 or whatever, having these long conversations. Maybe I was a little older, but I'm sure what I was saying was not sophisticated. I'm sure it was like silly child stuff. But I remember being like, whoa, and just thinking philosophical kind of stuff is cool. I didn't know it at the time as philosophy, but I thought that stuff was cool. So I think it's always been a part of who I was. And it was kind of natural for me to go that direction. Ray Slimajir says, what arguments against anti-realism do you think is good? I don't think there are good arguments against it. I don't really think there is a lot of good arguments in philosophy generally. Frutton Inferno says, in the debate where you were drawing these distinctions, Enoch would reply that informed people obviously already know these, but when he would reply or he did reply, I don't remember that coming up in that conversation. But then why did every academic hardly mention appraisal relativism? I don't know. Good question. The cynical and unflattering reason why critics of anti-realist positions would focus exclusively on agent rather than appraiser relativism is because it's an easy target and they want a punching bag because they hate relativism. There's actually a section. Is it in Ethical Intuitionism? Can't remember which book it's in from Humor. He has like a section heading, which is like, I hate relativism. To look at the way that Nathan Nobis and other people discuss anti-realist positions. They hate these positions. They're antagonistic towards them. They have contempt for these views. And I think they're unfair towards them. And I don't think they treat them with anywhere near the care, precision, and respect that these positions deserve. He did reply. You're saying that Enoch said that everybody's already aware of the agent appraiser distinction? It's irrelevant if they don't. I mean, if anything, it's even worse. So they're aware of the distinction, but they suppress it. So what are they? Are they negligent or dishonest? That's not a good thing. Front Inferno says, he was saying those distinctions you kept drawing were essentially pointless because educated people already know all these things. So they wouldn't assume you approve of murder because you don't say it's subjectively wrong. I don't remember the context to comment on it, and I don't want to base any response I give to Humor based on like a secondhand thing from you. Rayson says, have you ever heard Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism? Yeah. Not really interested in that stuff. All right.
Opinion, man. When we disagree, you're just saying I like chocolate and the other person says I like vanilla over and over again. Like, why are we arguing? Why are we pointing out statistics and having elaborate debates? It seems like we think there's a fact of the matter that either I or one culture could be mistaken about.
No, you could just want different things. This is trivially easy to address as an anti-realist.
Otherwise, the arguments make no sense if subjectivism is true. But it seems like everyone acts as if subjectivism is not true. So again, the whole point of this video is to try and get you to see what you actually implicitly believe, to see if your belief in subjectivism versus all these other implicit beliefs you have contradict each other enough where you actually want to give up subjectivism. So in conclusion, you can stay a subjectivist, but you're forced to accept the first. Either you or your culture are always infallible in all moral matters. You can never make a mistake. Second, morality.
False. Nothing about the position entails infallibility. There's no particularly good reason to think that subjectivism would commit people to or entail infallibility. There's no good reason to think cultures are infallible or that individuals are infallible. Even if they were, it would be trivially true then that people are infallible about what's morally right or wrong. So what? It's not a big deal.
Arbitrarily shift. There's absolutely no reason why baby torture can't be permitted. Third, anything that the Nazis did, any kind of genocide, and whatever was going on Epstein's Island, none of those things are actually wrong according to subjective.
None of those things are actually wrong. Christian, what the fuck do you mean by actually? Do you mean stance independently? Hey, there's this view that says nothing is stance independently right or wrong. Well, one implication of that view is that nothing that happened on Epstein's Island is stance independently wrong. Yeah, Christian, that is an implication of the view. So fucking what? What does that have to do with the attitudes of a subjectivist? A person could like literally like track, they could be in the process. They could say, I'm a subjectivist. And I, as a subjectivist, am against human trafficking. And they could like go around being like Iron in an Iron Man suit, just like blowing up all human traffickers, right? And you could say, well, they don't think human trafficking is actually wrong. Meanwhile, some fucking loser moral realist could be sitting in their basement in front of a computer on a stream going, well, I think human trafficking is actually wrong. Well, they do absolutely dick about it. Okay, so once you separate these abstract views, who gives a shit about the abstract views? What matters is people's actual values. What Christian is saying here is super misleading. It's making it seem like subjectivists are cool with Epstein or they're cool with horrible, awful things. Nothing like that follows from the view. Nothing like that follows from the view. This is normative entanglement all the way to the hilt. Man, I dislike this stuff. Ugh, let's hear it again so I can feel anger again.
Get you to see what you actually implicitly believe and to see if your belief in subjectivism versus all these other points more anthropological. But it's impossible to make sense of disagreement if you're a subjectivist, because moral facts just come down to like your opinion, man. When we disagree, you're just saying I like chocolate and the other person says I like vanilla over and over again. Like, why are we arguing? Why are we pointing out statistics and having elaborate debates? It seems like we think there's a fact of the matter that either I or one culture could be mistaken about. Otherwise, the arguments make no sense if subjectivism is true. But it seems like everyone acts as if subjectivism is not.
It seems constantly Christian talks about how things seem to him. Christian, doesn't seem that way to me. I don't care how things seem to you. It seems to me like people have practical conflicts about their values. It seems to me like nothing about the way that people act in any way hints at them thinking that they're stance-independent moral facts.
True. So again, the whole point of this video is to try and get you to see what you actually implicitly believe and to see...
Yeah, see, what you actually implicitly believe. Christian is still operating, I didn't catch this before, he's still operating in the assumption that people are implicit realists. That's an empirical question, Christian. And guess how much fucking evidence you have for it? None. Guess who has evidence against it? This guy. So if you want to discuss the empirical evidence with someone that's actually studied the topic, I'm here to talk to. That you implicitly believe. Just, ugh.
If your belief in subjectivism versus all these other implicit beliefs you have contradict each other enough.
Yeah, there's not a contradiction.
Actually want to give up subjectivism. So in conclusion, you can stay a subjectivist, but you're forced to accept the first. Either you or your culture are always infallible in all moral matters. You can never make a mistake. Second, morality can arbitrarily shift. There's absolutely no reason why baby torture can't be permitted. Third, anything that the Nazis...
That's technically true. Yeah, your attitudes could change. What's objectionable about that?
Did any kind of genocide...
Like, don't moral realists think that you could change what you think the stance-independent moral facts are? You could realize you were wrong about what you took them to be?
And whatever was going on Epstein's island, none of those things were actually wrong according to subjective.
Yeah, that's like actually wrong. That's what I call a misleading modifier. What does he mean by actually? If he means stance independently wrong, then it's trivially true that a view according to which there are no stance independent facts doesn't hold that they're stance independently wrong. But here's the thing about actually. If subjectivism is true, the only sense in which anything is right or wrong is in the subjective sense. There are no stance-independent moral facts. So why would you say that the subjectivist is committed to there not being anything actually wrong? They're the only ones that thinks things are wrong in the way that things actually could be wrong, whereas the realists aren't. So the subjectivist could say, no, Christian, actually only subjectivist thinks that things are actually wrong. Since realists don't think things are subjectively wrong, they only think they're wrong in a non-subjective sense, but there is no non-subjective sense in which things are wrong. They don't think things are actually wrong. So it's technically true, conditional on subjectivism being true, that Christian doesn't think that what happened on Epstein's Island is actually wrong. Christian doesn't think that the Holocaust was actually wrong. Does that sound nice, Christian? Do you like that? Do you like someone saying you don't think the Holocaust was actually wrong? Because that's what you're saying about me. And it's fucked up. It's not a nice thing to say about people, because a casual audience that isn't prepared to understand the implications of that makes it seem like the person is saying you're okay with the Holocaust. And I don't think that you are. I'm sure you're against the Holocaust. I'm sure you're against all the horrible stuff you mentioned in this video. But when you're not careful, when you describe these views, you make it seem like to an audience, and this is on TikTok with like teenagers and shit, you make it seem like if a person says they're subjectivist, they're okay with the Holocaust. And that doesn't follow. And it's fucked up to talk like that. It's negligent, and it's implying the view commits a person to horrible normative attitudes. And it does not commit them to those horrible normative attitudes. To say, oh, subjectivists don't think that the Holocaust is actually wrong. Okay, again, actually, what do you mean by actually? If you mean stance independent, it's trivially true that an anti-realist doesn't think things are actually wrong. But I, as an anti-realist, think that the only actual sense in which anything is wrong is in a stance-dependent sense. And since you think that things are wrong in a stance-independent sense and nothing is actually stance-independently right or wrong, only I and other anti-realists like me that can think that things are actually right or wrong, and you can't think they're actually right or wrong. So you don't actually think torturing babies is wrong. You don't actually think that, I don't know, torturing everyone for all of eternity is wrong. You don't actually think that. You don't think that, because the only sense in which it could actually be wrong is a stance-dependent sense. Do you see how if you just presume your background assumptions about what it would mean to be actually wrong, like if you just actual, what entitles the realist to say of the framing of the dialectic that the only sense in which things would actually be wrong is in the realist sense? That is itself a matter of potential contention between the realist and the anti-realist. A subjectivist is not going to grant that things would only actually be wrong if they were stance-independently wrong. Why the hell would they think that? They're not going to think that. And so this is a presumptuous, misleading, tendentious, terrible way of framing this issue that misleadingly makes it seem like anti-realists are nasty, vicious people. This is bad rhetoric. You know, Christian over on TikTok said, it's ironic Lance complains about rhetoric. Really, Christian, where's my rhetoric? Quote me. Let's show it. I'm sure I've got it. Now, first of all, what's the irony? Someone was talking about when I talk about normative entanglement, and I say that this is a rhetorical move that realists make, that they shouldn't make. Okay. So sometimes I use rhetoric. Now, the fact that I and everyone, pretty much everybody uses rhetoric, does it follow from that like it's ironic that I sometimes use rhetoric? Not really. Pointing out, hey, here's the thing realists do that they shouldn't do. It's misleading. I mean, there's rhetoric, and then there's misleading, loaded questions and misleading, nasty framing. Do I do that? Because you just did that in this video. You did it. When do I do nasty, misleading framing of realists? When do I intentionally go out of my way to make realists seem bad on purpose? I mean, here I did it as a sort of performative demonstration to show why you shouldn't do it. But do I routinely make a point of like trying to castigate realists as like evil, horrible people? I don't think that I do. And yet you're doing that here for anti-realists. And you're also operating on a rather pompous and condescending presumption that everybody is implicitly a realist. I don't go around assuming everybody's implicitly an anti-realist. I don't go around so convinced that my perspective is the only legitimate one, the only defensible one, that everybody implicitly agrees with me. And yet realists routinely go around and just convinced everybody is a crypto realist. Most people are implicitly realist and just don't realize it. That's a profoundly presumptuous perspective to have. I don't have that perspective. And so, you know, he says it's ironic. Not really. Of course, everybody uses rhetoric. You use it. I use it. That doesn't make it okay for you to do this specific thing or to use normative entanglement, which you've also done in this video. Those things can be bad. Now, if I do bad stuff sometimes, that doesn't invalidate the fact that you just did something bad here. So.
From your perspective, maybe, but not from their perspective, it's totally fine. And fourth, if you're a subjectivist, any kind of disagreement is a performative contradiction. Because
no, it's not. Nonsense.
Disagreement implies someone could be right or wrong. But
no. So I showed the Kurthy paper yesterday. Disagreements do not require propositionality. You could have disagreements about practical matters and not just disagreements about what's true.
But if ultimately what
I've already said that 4
rightness or
times, so I'm not
wrongness
gonna
is
say it
the
again.
individual or cultural preference, there's nothing to disagree about. Now, if you reject subjectivism, you might be inclined to say, hey, maybe all that actually matters is happiness and just making more happiness. And this is a natural fact, and science could help us out with it. Well, this is called naturalism, and it has a very big issue that we'll get.
All right, let's go to the next video. Where was it? Here it is.
But science gives us subjective answers. Maybe science can help us figure out what's objectively moral.
Let's start from the beginning.
But science gives us subjective answers. Maybe science can help us figure out what's objectively moral. Wrong again. Welcome back to my series where I argue for objective morality. The way I'm doing it is I'm going through all 5 possible theories of what morality is.
See, all 5 possible. Hey, Christian, what about my view? It's not one of the 5. Is my view impossible? Did you do a video showing my view is impossible? No, you didn't. Neither is humor.
And if I can argue that 1, 2, 3, and 4 are wrong, then you are forced to conclude morality is objective. In this episode, we're talking about moral naturalism. This is the theory that all moral claims basically reduce down to just claims about physical reality. And hey, science is really good at figuring out what's going on in physical reality, right? So we could just ask science to solve our moral questions. Wrong. I'm looking at you, Sam Harris. Now, there are 2 kinds of moral naturalists. These should be some scary words, but if you're watching this, you're smart and you can figure this out. The first is analytic. Analytic just means true by definition. The second is synthetic. This means we discover these facts. Analytic naturalists would say something like, the word good just means something like, say, pleasure. But if this statement about meaning is true, we should be able to take any sentence with the word good, swap it out with the word pleasure, or whatever they suggest it means, and have the meaning of the sentence be exactly the same. But this is not the case. Let's ask the question, is pleasure good? You could rephrase that as, is pleasure pleasure? Now, that sentence is not nonsense. But
yeah, it is. Hey, analytic naturalism proven.
But the meaning has now shifted. When you ask, is pleasure good? You're trying to put pleasure in a category of good or bad. You're passing a judgment. But when you say, is pleasure pleasure? You're asking a question about identity. Is A equal to A? That's a different meaning. And since the meanings have shifted once we swapped out the words cannot mean the same thing. So analytic naturalism is false. Now, synthetic naturalists are more sophisticated.
I don't think I have the interest in defending analytic naturalism to try to reject that, but that sounds a little suspicious. Analytic naturalists can just say it's intuitively obvious that pleasure is like that moral claims reduced to claims about pleasure or something like that. And what if they find that to be intuitively obvious or self-evident or something like? What are you going to refute? How would you refute that? They could just say, nope, my seeming is stronger than whatever your argument is to the contrary. So they could always moor their way to analytic naturalism being true. And I don't know, what would the objection to that be? But I don't have that intuition. Okay, well, I don't have your realist intuitions, Christian. So is that an objection? So, when all you've got for your method is this analytic a priori intuition stuff, you really don't really have the tools to reach any conclusions in a satisfactory way in these matters.
Oh, okay, listen, goodness is not by definition anything natural, but we can discover that goodness is something natural. The same way we discovered H2O and water were actually the same thing all along. Now, there are two main problems with this approach. The first is, this is just a category error. It's obvious that evaluative properties like goodness and badness and rightness and wrongness and duty and all these things are just a completely different sort of thing than mass and charge and spin and
That's his argument. It's just obvious that this is a category error. It's just obvious. Oh, okay. So let's say I'm a synthetic naturalist. Here's my rebuttal to that. No, it's not. That's it. No, it's not. So if he could say it's obvious, I could just say, No, is philosophy going to descend into going, It's just obvious is not an argument. This is ridiculous.
Momentum. How do we know this? The same way that Beethoven's symphony and a Tesla car are different things. You just know these things conceptually. The second part.
His argument is this is true conceptually. And what the hell? Beethoven's symphony is different from a Tesla. So synthetic natural moral facts they couldn't be like charge and spin. But like them in what respect? They're like them in that they're both natural. It doesn't mean like them in what regard? The naturalist doesn't have to think that the moral facts are like independently constituted. They supervene on other natural facts. And you could go out and you could find those natural facts. You could find instances of pleasure or cooperation or something like that. And those could be every bit as much the theoretical construction of a mature science. Like let's take, for instance, Oliver Scott Curry or Fraser and Sterelny's accounts, which largely treat moral facts. They're synthetic naturalist accounts that treat moral facts as natural facts that are facts about what's conducive to cooperation. Are these like charges and spin and atoms? Yes, they are. Have you ever seen a charge or spin or an electron? No, and neither have I. What are these? These are theoretical constructs that are posited to account for a given set of observations within a particular special science for stuff happening at very small scale. We also have cosmology and physics that deals with things at the large scale, general relativity and gravitational lensing and stuff like that. So you have these large scale phenomena. You also have the social sciences. In the social sciences, we also deal with unobservable entities. How do I know that? Because I'm a psychologist. So we deal with constructs like personality characteristics, conscientiousness, or agreeableness or extroversion. Have you ever met a person who's friendly? Friendliness. Can you have a piece of friendliness? No, you cannot. So these constructs are used to describe patterns of behavior. It's the same. Science is riddled with descriptions of patterns of the interactions of phenomena that are not reducible to pieces of the world, but rather to reliable patterns of the way that those phenomena interact with one another. Think of something like a center of gravity. It's not a thing that you have, and yet it does figure into theoretical accounts within the sciences. Much of what we propose in the social sciences are theoretical constructions that account for observations of behavior. And the patterns that figure into those theories are not directly instantiated in like a neuron or something like that. And they don't have to be for us to talk about things like norms or cooperative norms. And so the synthetic naturalist that says, hey, moral facts are facts about what's conducive to cooperation can say, look, the moral facts supervene on this given set of facts about the behavior of interacting agents, intentional agents. And those things, the facts about their psychology, facts about the sociology, the cooperative norms within a given social community, are every bit as much studyable by the sciences as like quarks and electrons. So when Christian just says this is obviously a category mistake, what the fuck is he talking about? But no, it's not obvious at all. Look, I'm not a synthetic naturalist, but they're not saying something anywhere near as obviously absurd as he's saying here. Does he think, like, I mean, come on. Have you read Kim Strelny's work? Kim Strelny is a badass. He has a fantastic book. Now I'm having a brain fart. What is the name of the book? The Evolved Apprentice. I love that book. Kim Strelny is brilliant. I'm not as familiar with Fraser, but I read a draft of that paper before it got published. Now, I don't agree with the paper. I'm an anti-realist, but the naturalist realist account that they put forward is quite robust. It's quite interesting. It's not something that could be dismissed by saying that's obviously a category error. That's a lazy, ridiculous objection to a synthetic naturalist account. He doesn't even he doesn't consider a single one of these accounts. He doesn't break down what Strelny and Fraser say. He doesn't break down what Curry says. He doesn't consider their arguments. He doesn't consider the case. He doesn't engage with it at all. This is disappointingly lazy philosophy. It's bad. And Christian, shame on you for this. I mean, you're presenting this on TikTok. I understand the need to simplify, but simplification should not be an excuse for just utterly failing to charitably or even substantively engage with the positions you're criticizing at all. You don't even tell anybody the content of any of these positions. You don't say anything about these positions. Notice, I'm an anti-realist that's being super, arguably a little aggressive in the way that I'm critiquing your perspective on the matter. Again, this is not at all personal. I really don't take this personally. I critique people like this, and then I'm happy to, like, I don't know, hang out with them or whatever, like kind of like a boxing match or something. So absolutely, I'm cool with you. But what you're saying here is not good. It's not good. This would be super duper disappointing in almost any like serious philosophical context, like if you're at a conference or something like that. To say it's obviously a category error is just such a punt. It's such a negligent failure to actually substantively engage with the view. Now, notice I go out of my way for several years now to be super duper mega ultra to the max critical of realist views. Now, I've just explained a little bit about a couple different realist views. I've said some positive things about those views. Now, would I be necessarily super charitable to them? Not necessarily. Maybe I would fail to really appreciate the virtues of the naturalist position. I just said in chat and here that I would struggle to play devil's advocate in defense of realism. But what I would not do in critiquing these views is offer like I wouldn't respond to Humer's argument like for moral convergence by saying, well, it's just obviously false that convergence is best explained by positing realism. It's just obvious, or that's a category mistake. It's obvious. That's not serious engagement with a view. And you have a responsibility if you're posting philosophy on TikTok to not give the impression that that's an appropriate way to do philosophy, because it's not. It's not. So do better than that, please. I'm one of those people saying do better, but for real. I mean, I'm saying it a little ironically, but do better. Because I think you can. Your blog post critiquing subjectivism some time ago really went into quite a bit of detail. And if if you can't make a video long enough to give these things their justice, don't make TikToks about them. Okay, not everything is suitable for TikTok. I've seen people do TikTok videos where they talk faster or they're more concise with it. But your videos, this is disappointing. And I think you're doing a disservice to people on TikTok. And I'm serious about that. I'm not happy with this. Let's have a look at chat. We'll get through this video. Wow, did I do an hour and a half on 2 TikTok clips? That's ridiculous. Jit says, analytic naturalism, this position is new to me. Yeah, I don't know of anybody that actually endorses it. You could go read about it at the beginning of the Stanford Encyclopedia entry of Stanford Encyclopedia Philosophy entry on moral naturalism, where they're quick to point out some issues with it and then move on. I haven't looked at that article in a while. Let me have a look and see if they talk about the Straley and Fraser account, because I think that's a really cool paper to read if you want to read about yeah, the Straley and Fraser paper is not mentioned on there, but they do talk about synthetic naturalism. Let me link directly to the analytic naturalism section because it's right at the beginning. It should be anyway. Where is it? Here it is. It's right in the first section. Oh, okay. It's right in the first section. What is moral naturalism? So check that out there, and you could read a little bit about it. But I don't know of anybody that endorses analytic naturalism. So I'm sure there are some people, but I just haven't met them. All right. I haven't watched Matthew's channel in a long time. Matthew Adelstein, his most recent live stream, asked Michael Humer to explain qualia in case Lance Bush is watching. Did he explain what qualia are? It's funny Matthew had mentioned me. After Matthew, I'll tell you what happened with Matthew. Matthew kept posting this stuff, and I know Travis, who was the first person to comment here, commented on this too. Matthew had posed this hypothetical question that he thought would be a good way to figure out whether non-philosophers are moral realists, and it was something like, if there was a world in which everybody approved of baby torture, would baby torture be morally acceptable or something? And he thinks most people would say no, and that this is good evidence that they're realists. It's not good evidence. It would not be good evidence that they're realists, even if people did say that. That question is misleading. It's ambiguous. And what I mentioned is, look, when it comes to constructing valid questions and presenting them to untrained non-philosophers with respect to questions about metaethics, I'm one of the only specialists on this topic in the world. Does that make me the best or make me necessarily right about it? Absolutely not. Of course, I have my biases. I could be totally wrong about this stuff. But there aren't a lot of people that specialize specifically in the topic of the methodology of eliciting metaethical responses from non-philosophers. There's not a lot of us. I might be the only person that actually specifically specializes in that methodology. There are people that run studies on this. But there's not so the point is, I did years and years and years of work on this. It's one of these cases where it's like a narrow area where there aren't a lot of people that specialize in the topic. I'm a specialist. And I'm like, look, I don't get along with Matthew very well. I'll just be honest, I don't really like Matthew very much. But I'm still willing, in spite of the fact that I kind of get an ick feeling when I interact with him, to spend my time, because I have my dedication to making sure people understand topics I care about is greater than my personal ick feeling. And he showed no interest in that. So Matthew will surround himself with people that are not necessarily specialists or the most brilliant at a particular topic, but that I don't know what they say that convinces them that they're so brilliant. I don't know, Ethan Muse and certain other people. I'm sure they have their virtues. Don't get me wrong. But when a specialist expert on a particular topic says, hey, I am willing to take the time to share my insights on why I think you're misguided about this, and he's dismissive towards that person, there's something off about that. And then I saw in subsequent YouTube comments, there'd be people like, I'm writing my dissertation on this, and you're totally wrong about this, and here's a detailed reason why. And Matthew would give curt, dismissive replies to these people. There was also a point where Matthew cited a paper. Its paper is something like why people probably think what you think they think, or why non-philosophers probably think what philosophers think they think, something like that, where the paper purported to show that we don't really need experimental philosophy because philosophers are pretty good at predicting the results of experimental philosophy papers. Now, both Joe Schmidt and I raised criticism of that. Now, here's the thing. I said there were significant methodological problems with the conclusions Matthew was drawing from that paper. The studies are cool. There's nothing really wrong with the studies. I think that they're interesting, but the results of the studies, I think, have very modest implications in terms of how much they threaten experimental philosophy. So I like the studies, but they're rather narrowly limited. They ran tests on 4 different studies. I think 3 of them, Josh Snow was a co-author. So there's other issues that I pointed out with those, and that Joe Schmidt pointed out similar issues. Now, I mentioned there were problems. Matthew asked me specifically, what do you think that those issues are? He asked me, and I gave a detailed response. And Joe jumped in and said, hey, Lance, why don't you give a response to this? I gave a detailed response. Joe gave a much more concise response that basically said the same thing, but I went into my standard super neurotic excessive detail. I gave this response, no response from Matthew. After a year or two, I pressed him on the matter. I'm like, look, you never respond to this. And he'd give excuses. Well, I don't want to go track down the thread. Matthew, I bookmarked the thread. Boom, here it is. And then he gave this very curt response, and it was not adequate at all. And I responded, and he didn't engage further. As far as I know, maybe he did, and I didn't check. I don't think so. Now, one second. My microphone is about to fall. I got to fix it. 1 second. No, don't fall off the table. 1 second. I got to fix the mic. Oh, geez. There we go. I got it. And I got to go, everybody, in about 20 minutes. It's going to stay. Oof. Something is way wrong with this. What on earth? It's just not staying. Oh, man. Technical issues. All right. Well, the mic is going to be a little lower until I can fix it later. Turn up the gain. Can you all hear me okay in the chat? Well, I just hope you can. All right. So anyway, yeah, he gave this dismissive, curt response like he wasn't interested in engaging. And I started to get the impression, I've had reports from other people, that when people really give good criticisms to Matthew, he disengages and gives a whole bunch of excuses, and he'll give a curt response to discharge, like, well, technically I responded, but he suddenly becomes incurious whenever he's really boxed into a corner and subject to being refuted on a given matter. And I don't like that behavior. I think it's bad behavior. And so, Matthew, I hope you hear this. You do this. It's not good. It makes you look bad. And it made me lose a lot of respect for you. Now, you look very much dedicated to pumping out an enormous amount of content and really thinking things through. And I know you're very dedicated to effective altruism and helping animals. And I think that's all great. So good for you. I'm glad you do that. I don't do that. You could put those points on your scoreboard for being a good person. But being evasive and I think you convince yourself that you're just not interested in topics when you're threatened by people that could show that you're wrong about something. I think you do that. I think you might know that you do that. And I think that that's not good. And I think you should acknowledge that and improve your behavior. And I'm just, why bullshit people? I think he's doing that. What I'm not saying that because I like want to get Matthew. I'm saying that because I'm hoping Matthew will go, yeah, he's right, and stop doing that shit and come have a conversation with me about experimental metaethics and go have conversations with all those other people that he was dismissive towards. And part of the reason I got particularly frustrated about this is because I know my biases, and I could understand somebody not wanting to talk to me. I could be kind of a grumpy person in some ways when I talk to them. But Joe Schmid is the gold standard for a charitable, friendly, serious person that deserves to be taken seriously. Joe is absolutely freaking brilliant. And for Matthew to be dismissive towards what Joe said, nah. You could be dismissive towards what I say. I get it. Maybe you don't like me, right? But if you're dismissive towards Joe, you're probably the problem. So, Matthew, shame on you for ignoring Joe Schmid. Shame on you. Seriously. I'm sorry to leverage you for this, but that really, I'm very sorry. It really bothered me. It really bothered me that he was so dismissive. And he didn't even apologize for ignoring me for a couple of years. Now, think about that. I wanted a serious engagement with him. I was expecting a response. And that stuck with me for a couple of years. You know what that shows? I think it shows that I give a shit about this. But Matthew clearly didn't. He just wanted to move on. So he makes a claim, this bold claim. This paper shows you're wrong, Lance. Here's 50 reasons why it doesn't, right? And then just crickets. No acknowledgement. No, hey, you're right. I was wrong. Or, hey, I don't agree. Here's a rebuttal. Nothing. That's bullshit. That's bullshit. I wouldn't do that to people. At least I don't think I would. And if I did do that to people and someone points it out to me, because maybe I have, I will apologize and I will try to address it. And I'm not going to make excuses, or at least I hope I won't. I'll commit myself to this now. Not going to make excuses. I'm not going to give a curt response. And I'm not going to be all like unapologetic about it like you were, Matthew. So shame on you. Bad behavior. Naughty, naughty. Ugh. Sorry, I had to address that because it came up. I didn't have to. I wanted to. All right, I knocked my whole desk. I've got monitors flying all over the place. I got these monitor arms, and everything is just falling all over the place. I kind of don't like them. Let's have a look at the chat. And am I even going to finish 2 videos? Sapir says, as a fan of Hasek Chang, the claim that we straightforwardly discovered that water is H2O offends me. Jit says, aren't most philosophers in academia moral realists currently? Yes. So according to the 2020 Phil Papers survey, which you could look at their demographics and how they gather data, they're very transparent and open about everything. It's amazing what they did. It's 62% of philosophers endorse moral realism. 26%. Well, so you're asking, are they moral realists? There's a good article in Substack which shows that technically what the survey shows is that they collapse the 62%. Let me try to get it. Man, this stupid microphone is in front of my keyboard. I could show you what happened. It fell down. It's just falling, and see it's loose. Ugh. So it's in front of the keyboard, and it doesn't matter what I'm doing. It's just flopping all over the place. So I'm going to have to fix it. Okay. It's out of the way for now. So I'll talk over here for one second. Let me pull up the Phil Paper survey. Many of you have seen this already. Bear with me. There might always be new listeners, and it's good to show them this stuff. That's not what I want. There. All right. So you can see here. Notice how it has accept moral realism, lean towards moral realism. So if you want to be technical and precise, let me bring the mic back. Man, this stupid thing is a pain in the butt. All right. All right. So if you want to be technical and precise, technically speaking, it's only 37.35% that accept moral realism. I don't know if you want to count the 24.72% that lean towards moral realism as moral realism. If you lean towards it, are you one? But yeah, overall it's 62%, and then you have 26 anti-realists, and then you have all these other positions. You can see the others includes a bunch of different stuff. So that's where we're at currently. All right. Hiroyuki Tanada says, I don't have data on this, but I have a feeling if you included more continental philosophers, that might flip. Yeah, this is mostly analytic philosophers. Oh man, now the computer monitor is flopping all over the place. Andrew Moy says, Sam Harris sometimes sounds like an analytic naturalist to me. He does to me. But I don't even know if you could count Harris as a naturalist. Harris has probably the worst take on metaethics of anybody I've ever seen. I mean, maybe T-Jump has a worse take, but I think not. I think Harris is more confused. It's so confused, I'm not even sure it's coherent. Sam Harris does not know what he's talking about when it comes to metaethics. He says things that are virtually unintelligible. And he's very confused about the topic in a more general sense. It's very, very, very disappointing. Jit says it's very frustrating when people don't engage. Look, I'm not frustrated that he doesn't want to engage. I'm frustrated at that like, hey, give me a response to this. And then I give a response and he doesn't reply, or the failure to recognize, look, if it's a question of like epistemology or history of philosophy, and someone online doesn't want to interact with me, well, why should they? There's a million experts on the topic. But the specifics of the methodology and experimental metaethics, who else is Matthew going to turn to for insight on that? Someone that doesn't specialize in the topic? Like, it's just that, imagine you're like the only expert on, I don't know, like a specific type of salamander. Like, you wrote your dissertation on it. There's no other dissertations on it. And then somebody goes, that salamander doesn't live here. And you're like, yes, it does. And I am a specialist and I wrote my dissertation on that kind of salamander. I'm the only person in the world, or I'm one of like 4 people in the world that work on this kind of salamander. So I think maybe you should have a conversation with me. And they're like, not interested. Like, what? So it's very strange. And if he says that, well, I don't want to talk to you because I don't like you. Okay, well then talk to Thomas Polsler. I don't know. You could send him an email, or one of my colleagues, David Moss. He's very nice. I'm sure he would be happy to talk to you. So, and he works on methodology stuff with me. He's a collaborator that works on a lot of my projects with me. So there's other people that he could talk to, that I could refer him to, that are friendlier than I would be. So why show so little interest? It's weird for someone that, as far as I know, has never conducted an empirical study in their life, to be super mega confident that they know what the results of an empirical study would be and how it would work. And they're not interested in what a specialist on the topic has to say on the matter. It's just very strange. I haven't messaged Matt. Someone just gave me his email. I don't know how. Wasn't obvious how to contact Matt. I messaged Ian, but haven't heard a response. It turns out, let me check. Here it is. So Ian had sent me a message back about over a year ago now. So about 13 months ago, it was June of 2025, asking me a question. And then I didn't respond. Apparently I don't remember seeing the message. Then about a year later, it's almost exactly a year later, I asked if Ian wanted to discuss moral realism sometime. That was back in June of this year, so a month ago. No response. Then I sent a message, where I acknowledged, that other message was a year ago, and I apologized. So I'm not going to tell you what Ian said to me, just that I was messaged over a year ago. I don't like sharing, but I could say what I said. So I asked if Ian was interested in discussing moral realism. No response. I acknowledged the message from over a year. No response. And then I sent a message yesterday and haven't got a response. And that's fine. What might happen is it could be something about like not accepting a message or something, and so they're not visible. So it might be that Ian is not seeing the messages. I really don't know. So I've reached out to Ian. I'll reach out to Matt. And I'm hoping one or both of them would be interested in talking to me. But if they're not, that's their prerogative. Nobody has to talk to me. Allison Sutherland says it's hard to have worse metaethics than T-Jump. I agree, which is why I think that's why I said I think Sam Harris might have managed it. Berto says, I wonder if Sam Harris is more confused about metaethics or Craig. You mean William Lane Craig? I think Sam Harris is more confused about it. I don't think it's close. Kamal says Spain. Did Spain win? I don't know what's going on with that. Kamal asks, is there any possible new discussion with humor? Yeah, maybe. It hasn't been followed up on. Why hating Matt? He's not a horrible... Like, do you mean Matthew Adelstein? I don't think he's a horrible person. I think he has that one behavior he did that bothers me. And it really bothers me a lot. But other than that, he seems like a great person. He's getting people to donate to charity. He's doing all kinds of good stuff. I don't have to interpersonally like him to think he's a good person. He's just doing good stuff. All right, common grounds. There can be only one. Do you reject abstract objects in the actual world? What do you mean? No, I don't think so. I mean, I'm a pragmatist, so there's a sense in which I accept the external world, like the actual world, and abstract objects, but probably not in the sense that more metaphysically committed people do. Yeah, someone said he's responding to someone. Yeah, I know. But I still felt like saying that. All right, let's finish up this video.
Problem for the synthetic naturalist is, how the hell do you know when you have goodness in your hands? When we figured out that H2O and water were the same thing, we could look under a microscope and see things buzzing around and be like, okay, the thing that fell from the sky and is in the lakes and the rivers has this molecular compound, and therefore they're the same thing. How are you going to do that with goodness? You see,
this is a caricature. There's no expectation that we would observe goodness in a microscope. That's not what naturalists are talking about. You don't observe cooperation in a microscope. You don't observe norms in a telescope. You don't have them under, in a lab somewhere. A lot of the social sciences deal with constructs that cannot be directly observed. They're inferred from patterns of behavior. It doesn't make them not real or not natural.
Science is only ever going to give you descriptive facts. But from a list of descriptive facts, you can't get a prescription. This is the is-ought gap. No matter how hard you try, no matter how many corners of the universe, descriptive facts. But from a list of descriptive facts, you can't get a prescription.
Yeah, so the some naturalists would just abandon any type of irreducible normativity. They would just grant that that normativity can be reduced to descriptivity. Some of them won't, but a lot of them would. And so what? Okay, so you could object to that, and I think it is a good objection, but that's not the objection he's giving. He's bringing up the is-ought gap, but they might not have an issue with that. The is-ought gap is about deduction or logical inference more generally, where it can't be ampliative. You can't have stuff in the conclusion that's not somewhere in the premises. So you can't have an ought in the conclusion if it wasn't in the premises. This is trivially true. This is true of, you can't have anything in the conclusion that wasn't in the premises somewhere. Synthetic naturalists are not violating the is-ought gap. So what the hell is he talking about?
This is the is-ought gap. No matter how hard you try, no matter how many corners of the universe you scan, you're never going to find a little piece of the universe that says goodness as play.
Good Lord. This, Christian, this is incredibly amateurish. Amateurish? I can't even speak. This is very amateurish and not a good objection to synthetic naturalism.
Pleasure. That's not how it works. So if naturalism...
That's not how synthetic naturalists think that it works. So that's irrelevant.
It's false. Where do we go from here? If we're going to reject emotivism...
But by the way, notice what's happening here. I'm defending realists here, and he's the one critiquing them. What a world when Lance Bush is defending moral realists.
Objectivism and naturalism, are we forced to say that nothing really matters and that we should just be nihilists? That's the question we're going to answer in part 4. And as a reminder, this is all based on Michael Huemer's ethical intuitionism, whom I'm going to have on my podcast in a couple weeks, where we're going to debate moral realism. Don't forget to subscribe to my...
All right. So I'm done with that. We'll have to do a part 3. Let me close out the poll. Can people be mistaken about their preferences? 15% of you said no. What is wrong with you people? By the way, if I did a call-in show, who here would want to call in? Let's do a poll on that. I'm not going to give you an I don't know on this. I just want to know if yes or no. Cool. So the poll, we got 76% of people agree that people could be mistaken about their preferences. Let's see if I could find that Enoch video, and I'll try to get to the part that I think is relevant. What the heck? I just saw this the other day. It's a recent video and I'm not seeing it. One second, everybody. I'm going to check my history because I know I was watching it. So there's the Huemer debate, and that's on the rational alternative. I'll have to check that out. Where's the Enoch debate? There's another one on reasonable faith. Is the moral argument reasonable? And it's with David Baggett. And I want to review that with David Paulman at some point. Where the heck is this? I'm still looking for the video. I'll find it. I'll find it. There it is. Got it. So this was 1 week ago on Josh Zepp's channel. They talk a lot about politics and Israel-Palestine stuff, and I'm not real interested in talking about that. And it does not have timestamps. That's a bummer. All right, so we're going to have to skip through this to see when they pivot towards talking about realism. Let's see if they have a transcript. They do have a transcript. Let me search for moral realism in the video. Let's see when that comes up. No results found. Yeah, it says no results found. That doesn't make a lot of sense. All right, we're going to have to do it the hard way. And I don't have a lot of time. I have to leave in 10 minutes. I'll have to review more of this video at some point too.
Corruption that's a part of, I don't know, Jew, to prioritize the interests of Israeli Jews.
Businesses versus other
Right.
businesses. I always just thought that was weird. I mean, someone who cares about the Palestinian people.
Trying our children, you probably in all directions. And then I try to come up with a coherent system or to see what follows from things that I'm rather strongly confident in. But that doesn't mean that what I care about is the coherence of the system. What I ultimately...
And yet there's still a group of philosophers of mathematics who will say, well, it's correct insofar as it works.
Man, where do they start?
Case or legislated. And in fact, if I think that we shouldn't even be partial towards our children, you probably think that I'm wrong. I'll give more weight to the...
Because I never know before I tune in which Josh I'm going to get. Because I've spent the past 3 years, publicly wrestling with how I feel as a Jew, as a grandson of, Holocaust survivors, as a critic of Israel, as a sometimes not Zionist and sometimes Zionist, as a, someone who cares about the Palestinian people.
Give more weight to the near and dear. By the way, I think that the political version of Parts Our Children, you probably think that I'm wrong. And then something that you found out rather than,
mature version of what your claim actually is. But, it reminds me a little bit of mathematical realists, who...
Here we go. I think it's around here somewhere.
A long, complicated multiplication on a piece of paper with a pen, and I arrive at the number. This is not an opinion. This is a fact. If I've done it correctly, then it is absolutely correct. And yet there's still a group of philosophers of mathematics who will say, well, it's correct insofar as it works. And it just sort of works because, those are the rules of math as we understand them. And then there's another school of philosophers of mathematics who will say, no, it works because that number exists in, an almost philosophical Platonic realm. It's just as real as the table in front of me right now. What gets, and you make a similar leap with ethics, what gets you to make that leap? Why isn't it sufficient that I say that I've reached a conclusion that is viable, that is supported by all of the evidence that I can find, my conclusion about, I don't know, whether or not I should buy Australian is X. Why do we need to then jump into a metaphysical realm of realness in the universe?
Why do mathematical Platonists believe that the empty sets and the number 8 exist? As you said, as real as this table, probably more real than this table.
Right.
This table is contingent. It could have failed to exist, but the number 8 and the empty set are necessary entities. Why do they believe in that? I think that the answer, we're sort of deteriorating to general philosophical methodology here. The answer is that there's important stuff you can't do without them. Maybe you can't do scientific theory without them. Maybe you can't explain important things without quantifying over numbers, without assuming that sets
Yeah,
exist,
it's not getting to
without
what I'm interested in.
So it comes down to a kind of theoretical we have, or whatever it is that we want to explain, right? So I would use an analogous methodology in discourse more generally. And then I'm going to try and see whether we can do it without taking very seriously the existence of normative rules, laws, facts, or quarks, or sets, or fields, or numbers. And if we cannot, then that's a very good reason to moral deliberation, the kind of deliberation we talk about, without assuming that there are at least some normative truths, some moral truths that do not depend on us, that are out there for us to discover. This is not exactly moral entities. This is not exactly, moral particles. But it is moral truths and moral facts, and that's the stuff I care more deeply about. And it does seem to me that there are very strong intuitions, very strong things that we care very strongly about that cannot be.
Yeah, so you're starting to see some hints of this stuff that we care very strongly about. When I had a discussion with David Enoch, he said he doesn't care about the empirical considerations. He doesn't care about these sort of psychological questions. But here he says that there's strong intuitions. Whose intuitions is he talking about? His own, other people's? Like it's that sounds like an empirical claim, or at least it could be construed as an empirical claim. And then there's stuff that like we care about. These who is we? It matters whether, like, if you start saying we think this way, you're starting to talk about what other people think. How is that not an empirical claim? So when we had a discussion, David Enoch and I could specify what I mean by we. He was very much insistent that empirical considerations about what people think were relevant to the framework or approach that he was taking. And here in this discussion, at a couple points, he makes some claims about what people think, and it seems to be relevant to him.
Accommodated and vindicated without this kind of realism. I should say, by the way, that most of the metaethical discussion in the philosophical literature, not all of it, but most of it, agrees with the starting point, namely thinks that moral discourse at least exhibits what we call objective purport, right? It aspires to objectivity, and some of the other features that I like to emphasize. But then they show how, if they are right, they can accommodate that without going all the way realist, analogously to the mathematical Platonist. And that's, I think, of course, a fair game to play. Right? A lot will depend on, where I think the game ends, but it's a legitimate game to play.
And so, just to tease that out for us about the necessity of these things being true, the counterclaim to your position, I think I read Harman putting this, was that in the case of an electron, it is hypothesized.
Guys, I'm gonna have to go, and I haven't found this.
Then there's
I'll have to find it and have it timestamped so that I could look at it. But I really do. I just have to get going, and it's not going to come up quickly enough. So we'll return to that in the next stream. I'll do it at the start, so I don't leave it at the end, and I'll have it timestamped, so I'll show you, and then we'll continue with the Christian stuff. Got to get going. I will catch you all later. All right, everybody. So like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We're just pushing up on 3,000 subscribers. Not a lot of subscribers. I do think if I had more shorts and made clips and stuff like that, if people, I can put up some shorts. It's just that it would be a lot of work for me to go back through my backlog of like hundreds of hours of content. What is it now? 400 hours of content, listen to all of it, and then find good stuff to clip. When I'm doing a stream, if you want to throw in comments saying 17 minutes in, that's a good thing to clip. I'll clip those and put them up as shorts, and that could help the channel grow. So if you could help me out, I could outsource some of the work to you. That would make things better for all of us and get a bigger community here. So if you're up for it, go for it. Nope, you don't have to do that, but if you want to, it would help me out. Okay, so anyway, I'll be back to continue with the Christian stuff. We'll find the Enoch comments, and I don't think it's a big dig against Enoch. And it might be that he was misunderstanding or had a more narrow conception of what I was talking about when I was talking about empirical stuff. I'm still befuddled by that conversation, and I might need a new table because I felt under the table about what was going on, and that basically the screw that I had holding the arm onto the table tore through this material, which is very cheap. I just ripped it. So I don't know how I'm going to hold the mic up anymore. I'm going to have to move it to a different location. So something wrong happened there. I'm going to have to get a new desk. Oh, I could flip the desk around and then use the other side of it. That's what I'll do when I move. So we'll get more life out of this desk. Don't worry. I love this desk, and I don't want to have to get a new one. It's an IKEA desk. I absolutely love this desk, and there's not an IKEA nearby. So I don't think they ship stuff unless you're getting a lot of stuff. I do not want to have to get a new desk. All right. Okay, everybody. So yeah, do all the stuff, and yeah, I'll see you next time.